I've got to find Raymond. Maybe he's home by now.
All right, darling, whatever you want. But first, I have something to tell you. You know what I was doing when you so cleverly had the police call me? Don't bother trying to guess. You're too tired. I'll tell you what I was doing. After I dropped you off, I went straight home, and when I got upstairs...
Apartment 3B.
That's right. Very good. Before I even took my coat off, I telephoned my fiancé. Well, I told you I wasn't married. I never said I wasn't engaged. Well, I called up my fiancé, and he came over as soon as he could, which was instantly. And I told him I had just met you, and I gave him his ring back. I tried to convey my regrets for whatever pain I might be causing him. And then, just then, you had the police call to invite me to meet you at the 24th precinct. So I grabbed my coat, kissed my fiancé in the cheek for the last time in our lives we would ever kiss, and I ran. At the police station, they told me you had just beaten up a very large Chinese gentleman.
Not Chinese, dear. Korean. At least I think he was Korean.
A very large Korean gentleman. But that you were a pretty solid type yourself, according to Washington, with whom they had apparently checked. So I figured if they were willing to go to all the trouble to get a comment on you out of George Washington, why, you must be somebody very important indeed. And I must say it was rather sweet of the General, with you only a major. I didn't even know you knew him. If they were the tiniest bit puzzled about you, they could have asked me. Oh, yes, indeed, my darling Ben. They could have asked me, and I would have told them.
A very sexy and sultry Janet Leigh falling in love at first sight with Frank Sinatra, who's slightly brainwashed in The Manchurian Candidate. And that opens up tonight's edition of the movie program on Public Radio KCBX. It's Take Two, and the person across the aisle from me is an expert on Janet Leigh, who we'll be talking about tonight on the program. And that person is Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me is an expert on all things celluloid, the one and only, the czar of film on the Central Coast, the incomparable Jim Dee.
Good to see you, Bob. And Hank taking the holiday to be the great projectionist tonight
now
on Take Two.
That's a man coming in on Columbus Day. I hope all the honchos at KCBX are listening right now, because Hank is here working the dials on a national holiday. He's the Ernest Borgnine here, the man of iron. He's turning red right now.
Well, we're glad that you're there, and we did lose Janet Leigh on October the 3rd. She was born July 6, 1927 in Merced, California. And, you know, Bob, we were talking about Janet Leigh, what a great star she was, a huge star in the 50s and 60s especially. But we were going to devote part of the show to her, and maybe some. We've lost some great ones right around this time.
Gosh, there's been a flurry of deaths that has taken the Take Two team completely by surprise. Well, not necessarily surprise. Of course, we lost Russ Meyer, Janet Leigh, a terrific and talented leading lady from the 50s and 60s. Russ Meyer, the Sultan of Sleaze. We lost the wonderful Rodney Dangerfield. I don't get no respect. Oh, boy.
Yeah. And Christopher Reeve.
Yes, Christopher Reeve. And let's face it, I mean, what a heroic life that man led after his terrible injury. I mean, what an inspiration to all.
And when we're thinking about these losses, we started looking into the career of Janet Leigh, and both Bob and I came to the conclusion we're going to devote the entire show to Janet Leigh, because what an incredible filmography, what an incredible screen presence, and Janet Leigh did it all. She was in light comedies, she was in musicals, she was in great classic dramas. She essentially could do it all.
You know, what's interesting about her career, Jim, is started out at MGM, a contract player, like a 20-year-old contract player in a lot of costume dramas. And over the course of her career, she became a leading lady that played aside such strong men as John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, as we heard in the opening clip, Jimmy Stewart in The Naked Spur, Charlton Heston in Touch of Evil. It's a long list, not to mention the fact her husband of many years, Tony Curtis, they did a lot of films together. But, if you love film from that era, and we do, and I think a lot of the folks out there listening do as well, she was a pivotal part of that time period. Also, I guess you could say her and her then husband, Tony Curtis, were unofficial members of Sinatra's Rat Pack, so they ran with that crowd as well, off screen. This is, interesting, and born in Merced, California, kind of like a local gal, with tipping a hat to our Central Valley transplants here. She was one of yours, and she did quite well.
Yes, Janet Leigh's first film was in 1947 called Romance of Rosie Ridge. And then a few other films to her credit. She was making quite a few. In fact, from 1947 to about 1948, she made almost 5 or 6 films. Leading up to, in 1949, she played Meg in the film version of Little Women. And this version had Elizabeth Taylor. And it's a beautiful Technicolor extravaganza. I was watching some of it today. And, you've got all these... a lot of players in this
I think
film.
June Allison is in that as well, and that's MGM. It's just a classic MGM lavish Technicolor mounted production, loaded with starlets and Peter Lawford.
That's right. But, Bob, when I think of Janet Leigh, of course, I think of the films that have been brought up as her so-called landmark films like Psycho and Manchurian Candidate. But, boy, looking back into her career, she was extremely busy in the early days with a number of these costume dramas and just really playing many different types of roles from early on. And let's see, we do have a clip from Little Women from 1949. And, she really stands out. You have to think of Little Women as an ensemble piece. There's all these, lots of characters, and she really stood out in this. And she's, the thing that I've noticed in all the clips about Janet Leigh and all the roles that I watched her in today, which, of course, isn't her entire filmography, which numbers 63 theatrical films, but there's always that very strong character. I was somehow thinking of our show that we did on Katharine Hepburn, and it's not a fair comparison, but I always think of her as strong, intelligent, and extremely beautiful and sensual. There's sort of a smoldering aspect in her in a lot of the roles. Even in this clip from Little Women from 1949, she's young and she's feisty. And here's a clip from Little Women where she is being courted by a man, and unfortunately, when it's happening, she's sort of pushing him away, but then the old aunt shows up, and then you get the true character of Janet Leigh in Little Women from 1949.
Meg, please listen to me. I love you so. And even if you don't love me now, maybe you could learn to.
I don't choose to learn. Please go away and let me be.
Do you really mean that?
Yes, I do.
Won't you even think about it?
Just go away. Please go away.
Oh, Meg.
What's this?
What?
What's going on here?
He's just a friend of Father's. I'm so surprised to see you, Aunt March.
So that's evident. What mischief is going on here? I insist upon knowing. Who is this young man? Mr. Brooke?
Yes, Mr. Brooke.
The Lawrence boy's tutor? Did he dare propose to you?
Oh, please, Aunt March, he'll hear you.
Have you accepted him?
Please.
Well, now, let me tell you, miss, that if you marry this hook or rook or cook, not a penny of my money goes to you. Do you understand?
I shall marry who I please, Aunt March. And I don't care anything about your money.
It is your duty to marry a rich man and help your family, Miss Independence. And you may be sure that this hook knows that you have a rich relation, me. And that's why he wants to marry you.
How dare you say such a thing? Why, my John would no more marry for money than I would.
Very well, do as you please. No one takes my advice. But remember, the day that you marry him, I shall disinherit you. And now you've even made me forget what I came for.
That's Lucille Watson as Aunt Marge and a young but feisty Janet Leigh in Little Women from 1949.
So Lucille Watson, she plays the battle axe.
Yes. So, I mean, even in that clip, here's Janet Leigh, very young, very beautiful, but she has a mind of her own. She's very strong, and it's kind of a persona that she carried through many of her roles, that at least in a lot of the films that we'll be talking about tonight, starring Janet Leigh.
You know, Jim, as we were talking and listening to this clip, it reminds me of a film I saw her in around this time. It came out in 1949. It's a classic film noir called Act of Violence. And I think we hit upon earlier how her character is usually played against by a strong male lead. And I got to tell you, Act of Violence, I'm a big fan of film noir. It is one of the best. And in that film, she is married to Van Heflin, who's very big at the time. And because Van Heflin did something in a World War II prisoner of war camp, he turned in some guys that were trying to escape, and they were tortured and killed, but one survived. And the guy who survives is, of course, played by Robert Ryan. And Ryan's coming to exact revenge, limping. And she, I mean, physically she must have been about 20 years younger than Van Heflin, or so it seemed. She was very much younger. I think at the time she may have been 21 years old when this film was made. And there's these two established, much older male leads, and this is her in the beginning of her career. And she's utterly believable as his wife, and her fear is palpable, but she doesn't crumble. She's terrified, but she manages to hold it together. And there's a great scene where she actually seeks out Ryan on his own. He's menacing, and he always shows up late at night looking for her husband, and she decides to go face off against him by herself, which shows, again, the gumption. That gumption that she exhibits in this scene from Little Women. She's not afraid. Well, she may be afraid, but she'll still stand up for herself. Act of Violence is a terrific film noir. Unfortunately, it's never been released on video or DVD.
Oh.
You do see it periodically on Turner Classic Movies. It's been talked about quite a bit over the last few years, and I hope that someday they'll get around to releasing this film on DVD for everyone to see. A really terrific early work from Janet Leigh.
And if it does get released, Bob, we need to tell our listeners, Act of Violence was the fourth film that Janet Leigh made, and it was in 1948. And boy, I haven't seen it. Just you talking about it, that sounds great.
I just noticed it when we were talking about her early stuff. It just dawned on me that she did this great film.
Well, if it comes on TV or if it's going to come out on video or DVD, we'll let you know about this early role that Janet Leigh starred in, Act of Violence from 1948. Well, it was in 1951 that Janet Leigh got married to Tony Curtis. The marriage lasts until June of 1962, 11 years, and they had two children, Jamie Lee Curtis and Kelly Curtis. And what happened from their marriage is they appeared in quite a few films together. About five or...
I believe it was 5. Such as probably their most famous film together would be Houdini.
From 1953.
Directed by George Marshall, who I think did some what did he do? He did some film noirs, I believe, with Paramount. This was a Paramount picture, and it's Tony Curtis as the legendary magician and mystic Harry Houdini. Of course, I don't think Houdini quite had the pompadour or the DA that Tony Curtis had. But what's good about this movie? I mean, it's not like a Citizen Kane. It's kind of Harry Houdini light.
Yes.
But if you can just take it in that context, it's fun watching the two of them work together when they're very young and very much in love and obviously having a good time. And that's what makes this film work for me, because it really reminds me of them at their, they're young and they're beautiful and they're in love and they're having fun. And that energy seems to make the film very enjoyable to watch.
And before we listen to a soundbite from Houdini from 1953, it's important to note that Janet Leigh appeared in some of her famous roles prior to that. There's a classic Angels in the Outfield from 1951.
The original version.
We also have Scaramouche from 1952.
With the great Stuart Granger.
Yes, and Naked Spur, which Bobby mentioned, from 1953. And again, looking at her filmography, from 1947 on, she worked very hard. She sort of dropped out of the scene. We'll find out about when that was, past the...
Probably in the mid-60s.
Mid-60s, but it seems like the beginning of her career, right through the mid-60s, she was working a lot.
And she was an A-list actress all the way. I mean, these are all pretty much A productions.
Yes.
Naked Spur is a perfect example. There's Jimmy Stewart. It's a Western. We usually think of Janet Leigh in very sophisticated urban settings, or, be it a mystery, a film noir, a comedy. She always seemed to be, but here she is in a Western with Jimmy Stewart at the height. It's one of the great Westerns he did in the 50s. And she's also hanging tough with such hard guys as Dan Duryea and others. And this is a really enjoyable Western. And it's easily as good as like the Naked Spur or Winchester 73 that are some of Stewart's classics of the 50s.
So let's, but leading up to 1953, and here together, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh together on screen, and as Bob mentioned, the film Houdini is kind of Houdini light. It doesn't get any, it doesn't dig deep into his personality or anything like that. And it's a very entertaining film. And here's a clip from Houdini, and it's At Home with the Houdinis. Here's Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh.
Harry? You're $2.50 short.
Am I?
You didn't stop any place, did you?
As a matter of fact, I did. Had a chance to pick up a bargain.
Oh, really? Well, where is it and what is it?
They're good ones.
Oh, I'm sure.
Here, I'll prove it to you. Put them on. Now make sure they're locked good.
They're locked.
You sure? Wouldn't think I could get at them, would you? Now cover them with the towel. That's right. That makes 8,643 locks that I've opened today.
That's very nice, Harry. You'd better finish washing. Dinner's just about ready.
Just a minute. We're not eating here. I'm taking you out for dinner.
Taking me out? Oh, where are we going?
Well, it's a surprise.
Oh, what'll I wear? Oh, Mama, do you think that maybe... It's all finished except the bell. Oh, finished! Oh, thank you.
Life with the Houdinis.
Well, what's funny about this, Jim? And this is... Well, if I could just go back to the first clip when they're saying, well, he Sinatra gets in a fight with a large Chinese gentleman, and Frank is, no, he was Korean. In reality, he's Henry Silva, who's neither. And in this film, it takes place in the 20s, but it really seems more like a 50s sitcom. Oh, the Houdinis are trying to get ready to go out for dinner,
And what does he spend his $2.50 on? A pair of handcuffs.
And that's what I love about movies, because it's kind of goofy, but in a way where you kind of, I'll go with it. Sure. It's crazy, but I'll go with it. And it just seems like it's a very current film of that time,
yes,
even though it's the 20s. And that's part of what we mean by Houdini light.
And there was a great chemistry between the two. I mean, like you said, they were young, they were in love, they were just recently married, and it comes through on screen. They're really fun to watch. Absolutely. And,
after Houdini, Jim, she did a couple of sword and sand, not really sword and sandal, but like costume dramas. Prince Valiant, might remember that, with Robert Wagner.
What year was that?
1954, with the wig that made him look like Mo Howard or one of the Beatles. It's kind of funny. Who could forget Black Shield of Falworth? 1954, Universal Pictures, once again reteaming Janet Leigh with her then-husband, Tony Curtis, and in which he utters the immortal line in cinema, "Yonder lies the castle of my father." That's why I love movies. In his case, perfect pompadour and a DA. Looks like he was fresh off the J line in the Bronx. Only they put him in armor plating, and fun, silly but fun movie. And then she went on to do a really good crime film called Rogue Cop with Robert Taylor and Steve Forrest, based on the novel by William P. McGivern, who wrote Big Heat. It's another terrific film noir that has never seen the light of day on video or DVD ever.
Wow.
And that's another one that'll turn up on Turner Classic Movies periodically. I highly recommend that to anybody. If you get a chance to see it, it's really good.
And the title again of that is?
Rogue Cop. Then in 1955, she's in Jack Webb's classic jazz film. I know that sounds funny. Horn players, reading them their Miranda rights or something. No. But he made a couple of good films. This one is not bad. Pete Kelly's Blues. If you can just buy Joe Friday as a jazz band leader in Kansas City in the 20s, though it seems more like the 50s. She's wonderful in it. Peggy Lee's in it. She does a couple of great numbers. A very young Lee Marvin is a trumpet player in it as well. It's, again, not a heavy piece, but a fun, light movie. It's just a kick to see Webb in a part where he's not a cop. He's a band leader. Then she proceeded to do, in 1957, a film came out called Jet Pilot with Big John Wayne. And we have a clip from that, but before we play the clip, this is a real interesting oddity. This was produced by Howard Hughes when he took over RKO Radio Pictures back in the late 40s. Too many Lucky Strikes. This film was produced in 1950 under the auspices of Howard Hughes. And it's a Technicolor production, a handsome-looking film, directed by the great Joseph von Sternberg, starring John Wayne, who is a personal favorite of Howard Hughes. And for a multitude of reasons, there was production problems. RKO was very insolvent in those days. Hughes got bored two-thirds of the way through, and Hughes and von Sternberg fought viciously through the making of this film. that in 1950, with about 2/3 of the film in the can, maybe a little less, Hughes pulls the plug on it. And it's got a very young, extremely sexy Janet Leigh in it. And it's her like I had never seen her before. This film had been lost for many years because it turned out it was one of Hughes's personal favorite films. What happened was, in 1957, after the film had sat in a can for 7 years, Hughes decides to go back, finish the film, as RKO at that time is going in the tank. Before he pulls the plug, he decides he's going to finish the film for himself. So he gets the Duke and Janet Leigh, and by this time Janet Leigh is a very big star, and they come back and shoot some scenes and finish it off. I'm pretty sure von Sternberg is actually dragged kicking and screaming back to finish this. And at that point, I think it's released and pulled after 1 day. And then Hughes takes the print and keeps it for himself. All those years when he's in Las Vegas at the top of, where was he living? The Desert Inn or
where
something?
was he?
Oh, boy, I don't know.
Hank says yes, the Desert Inn.
That's it, yep. When he was living up top on the Desert Inn, fearing germs, and Clifford Irving, and he was watching this, The Conqueror, which is a story in itself, and Ice Station Zebra all the time. That's all he ever watched. And here's a clip from the movie, and let me just set it up. Janet Leigh plays a Russian lieutenant in the Air Force, and she's defected. She's flown a jet fighter from Siberia to Alaska, where she's being after her internment, she's being interrogated by Big John Wayne and Paul Fix, who's been in every Duke Wayne film of the 40s and 50s. He's an Air Force colonel. Paul Fix is an Air Force major. They've just realized after she's taken off her helmet that she's a beautiful woman, and they're a little off guard.
Plus, they don't know if she speaks English or not.
Correct.
This is from Jet Pilot from 1957.
I can handle this, Chief. I met dames like this before. You likey, Soupski? Soupski, you likey?
As an officer, I am entitled to certain privileges, one of which is that I not only be treated respectfully, but that I be addressed in a language I can understand. You likey speechki?
I guess that'll hold you. Let's get rid of this parachute. What air base in Siberia did you take off from, Lieutenant?
I'm not going to answer that.
How much fuel did she have left?
The bottom of the tank was still a little damp.
Take your thumb out of that soup, Major. And sit down, Lieutenant. We can talk while you're eating. Well, why don't you sit down and eat?
Aren't you hungry?
Yes, but not hungry enough to talk against my country.
Look, lady, we were under the impression that you came here to get away from your country.
Came here to prevent myself from getting shot.
Why would they want to shoot you?
Did something that was wrong.
You did? I can't believe it.
What did you do?
Disobeyed an order of my commanding officer.
What kind of an order?
It was in regard to tactics, so I naturally can't explain it.
That sounds reasonable.
Who asked you?
You know what little I saw of this film today, Bob, Jet Pilot, I was intrigued. I read a couple of brief reviews, and the critics weren't kind to this film. They just said it was kind of a mess and implausible. But I was kind of wrapped into it. Janet Leigh was spectacular in it. The Duke was he was really entertaining and very funny in this film. And you were telling me a little bit more about it. I need to see all of Jet Pilot from 1957.
Yeah, actually, they had very good chemistry, and it was that light. He actually showed a little bit, a good touch for light comedy, because that's mostly what it is between those two. Mm-hmm. There's a scene later in the film where he's, in order to try and break her of her socialist tendencies, he takes her to Palm Springs to a gift shop where he gets her all outfitted in the latest Paris fashions, and suddenly she's a tender comrade. I mean, the film is, it's a piece of junk, but they bring something to it that's fun.
It was really enjoyable. And the story you told about it, Bob, I mean, the fact that this, maybe Howard Hughes was watching this as he was in his reclusive state, it adds to it. It's, again, I maybe saw 20 minutes of it, and it was really intriguing to see Janet Leigh and John Wayne together.
Nobody saw this film, I think, until about 1993, where actually it was released on video by Universal. I don't know how the heck they got it. Maybe those Mormons or something pulled a deal. But, interesting film. It's not great cinema, but she's interesting. She really does have something here that rises so far above the really kind of ridiculous material.
And we'll be talking more about that great Janet Leigh screen persona as we continue the movie program Take Two on Public Radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara. Bob and I heading over to the concession stand. Back in a moment.
I wanna go to the movie show, me and my baby. Come on, let's go. On to the movie show. Let's go. I buy the popcorn as soon as we hit the door. My two brothers belling puns.
Take Two, the movie program, is sponsored by Smart Systems, expertise focused on the design, sales, and installation of custom music and video systems. Advanced technology for residential and commercial customers since 1984. More at kcbx.org. Funds for Take Two have also been provided in part by Moore & Brothers Automotive, starring Frida, the dog of many alter egos who is always glad to sniff your tires. Moore & Brothers Automotive, on Broad, near Tank Farm Road.
The creature from the Black Lagoon, Red River.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX. My name is Jim Dee. Across the aisle from me, the great Bob Whiteford. Before we continue our discussion of Janet Leigh, a reminder that the San Luis Obispo International Film Festival happens right around the corner. Mark your calendars. It's October the 21st through the 31st. It starts a week from this coming Thursday. A fantastic lineup of films at this year's San Luis Obispo International Film Festival. For information, call 805-546-3456. You can also get information about this year's San Luis Obispo International Film Festival by logging on to www.slowfilmfest.org. Once again, the number, 805-546-3456. The film festival from October the 21st through the 31st, 2004.
And I believe the this year's recipient of the King Vidor Award will be none other than
Eva Marie Saint. It's going to be great.
Yep, it should be very exciting.
Very exciting.
And there's a lot of new and unusual films that are showing, too. I can't wait to check it out, Jimmy.
It's going to be a great film festival this year, and Eva Marie Saint, star of On the Waterfront, of North by Northwest. You can name a slew of great movies.
Oh, Exodus, All Fall Down, which I believe will be at the gala premiere.
Yes.
I can't wait to see that.
Yes. Make it to this year's San Luis Obispo International Film Festival. It starts on October the 21st. Well, back to the mesmerizing Janet Leigh and looking at her amazing career and that striking, smoldering persona that she had on screen. And we're going to move to a great year for her. Again, we talked about the late 40s and 50s being the great years, into the mid-60s, the great years for Janet Leigh. And another film where she starred with husband Tony Curtis in 1958, The Vikings. Bob, I remember seeing this when I was a kid in the theaters when it was just released.
What an epic, what would you, I mean, it's just an epic Viking movie. Probably the greatest of them all, arguably. Directed by Richard Fleischer. It has a one-eyed Kirk Douglas. It has Ernest Borgnine.
Yes.
And it has Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh. And it's a fascinating film and a lot of fun. Epic. And it kind of like in the... almost in the vein of like Golden Voyage of Sinbad. There's just one thing after another going on. A lot of fun.
You know, and as we talk about the Vikings, because also this year is the same year that Janet Leigh made Touch of Evil, that's considered an all-time classic, directed by Orson Welles. Janet Leigh was a box office smash. She got people into the theaters, and she was very entertaining and fun in the Vikings, but then you also look at the depth of her acting ability, and so she was like a true movie star, but then she was a great actress as well, and that's a combination you don't see that often, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, 1958, if you look at the Vikings, which is like a box office programmer, you know, kind of, your classic like swords and, and, flaming arrows and all that jazz.
Drinking and wenches and things like that.
Big long boats and lusty men.
Yes.
And lots of killing and adventure, and the film is loaded with, like, I think James Donald's in it. He was in Bridge on the River Kwai playing the doctor. I mean, the film is just loaded with people. Great adventure film. Then you got Touch of Evil, which, and you touched upon it when you were talking about it. Touch of Evil is one of arguably three. Well, I don't think there's much debate. There's three films she did around this time that are all-time classics, and Touch of Evil is one.
Well, let's start with The Vikings from 1958, the same year that she made Touch of Evil with Orson Welles. And here is a scene with Tony Curtis, and Tony Curtis has rescued Janet Leigh from the clutches, literally the clutches, of Kirk Douglas. And they've stolen away and gone to another island, and they're talking about not only getting away from the lusty, bawdy Vikings, but also the fact that, well, they are in love with each other, of course, but they come from different religious backgrounds. This is Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh from The Vikings.
Still afraid?
No, I'm worth more alive than dead. Are you?
No. But I value my life much more now.
Of course, I'm grateful to you for saving me, and Ayala will certainly reward you.
Why should I take you back to Ayala?
But you must.
Why?
I'm pledged to him, on my father's word.
I didn't steal you away just to give you to another man.
Ayala isn't another man. He's a king.
And I'm a slave. And I loved you the moment I saw you. I loved you even before then. Kitala saw it in the ruins.
That's just Katala's silly talk.
Do you love Ayala?
I belong to him. By my father's word as a Christian king.
What's your father's word compared to Odin's will?
Do you know which of all the oceans is the widest?
The poison sea.
No. The ocean between a Christian and a heathen.
Our hands can reach across it as easily as that.
But that's just a joining of the flesh.
What else is missing?
Joining of our souls.
If our hands are touching, our souls must be touching.
But your soul is heathen.
If my soul is content to be heathen and yours content to be Christian, let's not question flesh for wanting to remain flesh.
Well, I got to remember that line. Let's not question flesh for wanting to remain flesh. That's a good one.
I have to try that sometime. see where it gets me.
So it's interesting, despite the rousing adventure of the Vikings, here we have, a great love story, but fueled by that clash of the heathen and the Christian. You can't mix up the Christians with those who believe in Norse mythology, like Odin and that. But interesting, it sort of kind of fuels it. They're like from the opposite sides of the religious track, let's say. So from 1958, the Vikings, wonderful adventure picture, Kirk Douglas, Tony Curtis, and Janet Leigh. The same year, we get to the classic Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, which, as you said, is probably considered one of the greatest film noirs. And, Orson Welles almost reinvents film noir. And Touch of Evil, of course, known for however long the single take opening. I'm not sure how many minutes it is, but folks, if you haven't seen Touch of Evil, see it for Janet Leigh, but also see it for the filmmaking prowess of the great Orson Welles.
I think it's safe to say, Jim, the restored Welles cut, which came out a few years ago, really vaults this film into the all-time classic category. Though the kind of butchered Edward Mull Universal International version, which we had seen for many years, is still good. Mm-hmm. The original Welles cut, there's no comparison. I mean, especially with the opening scene as well.
Yeah, Bob, we got to do an Orson Welles show. We've never done one, and that's almost a 2 or 3 parter.
Oh, I would think so.
But here is Orson Welles choosing Janet Leigh to star in this amazing film from 1958, which achieves a level of seediness that I don't think I've seen in a lot of film noirs. I mean, he goes for broke, especially in his own character. The Orson Welles character is Quinlan?
Hank Quinlan.
Ooh, man. You think of Orson Welles back in Jane Eyre, where he's very handsome and young, and then, boy, he just lets it all hang out in Touch of Evil.
I gotta think that when he shows up in that film for the first time, there was a lot of startled gasps from the audience.
Yes.
I know he's almost unrecognizable.
Yes.
And, a lot of controversy still swirls around this film, not only for its time, pushing the envelope with sex and drugs, which it does,
yes,
quite a bit, but also the casting of Charlton Heston in the lead. I remember watching Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film, where Johnny Depp's Ed Wood meets Vincent D'Onofrio's Orson Welles at Musso and Frank's.
Yes.
And they're talking about their travails as filmmakers, while Ed Wood's in drag, of course. And Orson Welles turns to him and says, "Can you imagine Charlton Heston as a Mexican?" I mean, it's still, you got to wonder if the film works on that level. There's enough happening there where I think even his obvious miscast doesn't hurt the film.
I agree.
And a big part of that has to do with Janet Leigh. She's wonderful in this. Beautiful, vulnerable. There's something about the film is offbeat as all get out, and she's hip to the whole thing.
She is.
Yeah.
Here is a scene from Touch of Evil, Charlton Heston calling his wife, portrayed by Janet Leigh, and on screen she's wearing this rather slinky teddy, and conversation between Charlton Heston and Janet Leigh. And, from Touch of Evil, there's always this sort of undercurrent of sleaze and evil. Here's a clip from Touch of Evil.
Yes, it's the Mirador Motel, and it's me.
Oh, darling, the news is bad. Quinlan is about to arrest that boy Sanchez.
Oh, Mike, is that why you called? To tell me somebody's been arrested?
No, that's not really why I called. It's to tell you how sorry I am about all this. How very, very much I love you. Susie?
I'm still here, my own darling Miguel.
No, I thought maybe you'd fallen asleep.
I was just listening to you breathe. It's a lovely sound. But I am sleepy.
Oh, of course you are. Well, then, I'll be calling you back later. Goodbye for now.
Mike? Hello?
Yes?
Oh, I just wanted to tell you, I'm awfully tired. Excuse me, this is Mrs. Vargas talking.
I know. It couldn't be anybody else.
Oh?
You're the only guest we got here just now. In the whole place.
Oh, well, as I started to tell you, there's no sign to put up outside the door, and I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't be disturbed. Oh, that is, if you're the one who's in charge.
Don't you worry, Mrs. Vargas. I'm the one who's in charge here. Nobody's going to get through to you. Unless I say so.
Oh, Vargas. Sergeant Menzies wanted me to give you this.
That's from Touch of Evil, Janet Leigh, and a call from her husband, Charlton Heston. And, you know, that scene in this film, Bob, I mean, you're the only person staying in this hotel.
And the fellow working the switchboard, it's not Dennis Weaver anymore. It's Danny Bravo, part of of the Mexican drug gang. She's about to get roughed up pretty bad by these guys. And that's part of this film, too. This really pushes the envelope. Now, I know it sounds awfully mild compared to some of the stuff we see today, but Touch of Evil, in the context of his time, 1958, that's 46, almost 47 years ago now, that's pretty racy, what's about to happen. And, you know, it's not as explicit as something that we would see today, but in many ways far more engaging because more is left to your imagination.
Yes.
And Wells does it so brilliantly. A terrific film. Definitely Touch of Evil, one of the greatest films I've seen ever.
And I really like what you said, Bob, and the fact that there is Janet Leigh, who, again, can bounce from, you know, something light like The Vikings, which she made in the same year, to something as envelope-pushing as working with Orson Welles on Touch of Evil. And after, Touch of Evil, The Vikings in the same year, the next year, she's in a light comedy with her husband, Tony Curtis.
The king of light comedy.
Yeah, it's a film called The Perfect Furlough, and we wanted to play a clip from this, which also displays Janet Leigh's versatility in the fact that you could play the character like she played in Touch of Evil, but here she is not only with that very strong and sultry screen persona, but she's also very funny. She had comedy down, but it was in such a way that she kept that persona, but she could play comedy.
Absolutely. In fact, she was very good at comedy. And this film, directed by one of the greats of comedy, especially of that era, the incomparable Blake Edwards.
Yes.
And I think we have a clip from The Perfect Furlough.
Private Philip Anderson.
Come on, Lieutenant, let's level with each other. Why the stormtroopers? Why everything?
The government feels that Sandra should be protected.
Suppose Sandra doesn't want to be protected. You keep acting like she's some sort of wildlife.
Oh, it's not Sandra whom we consider wildlife.
Oh.
You see, we're trying to protect her from a man whose personnel file reads like a stag movie.
You read the file?
All of it.
I guess there's nothing to add.
We're trying to see to that. Private Philip Anderson.
Lieutenant, as a psychologist to a patient, what's wrong with me?
Well, I don't know you well enough to say.
Well, I do know there's something wrong with me. for an example, here I am, a grown man, and I still like women.
There's absolutely nothing abnormal about a man liking women, Corporal. But there is a limit.
What do you do after you catch the limit? You throw the next one back?
I was foolish to even discuss it with you.
No, Lieutenant, I'm being very serious. You've studied the subject. You're very objective about it. You're above sex.
Start writing, Corporal.
That's a clip from The Perfect Furlough with Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh. And boy, you know, she's a lieutenant. She holds her own. And she's really straight in this scene, for instance. But it's, you know, she's playing off Tony Curtis, who's making light of everything. But she's perfect. She's really, and you know, Bob, I've been listening to these clips now that we've listened to most of our clips. What a voice Janet Leigh had.
Absolutely.
What a voice.
Yeah, very sultry.
And, you know, also just looking at her filmography here, because as we get past the mid-'60s, it gets a little few and far between her heyday. But, I mean, when we're talking about her versatility, we'll start in 57 with Jet Pilot, the fun film we talked about with John Wayne. Touch of Evil in 1958, then The Vikings, more of a popcorn movie. The Perfect Furlough, which we just heard a cut from. And then we go to Who's That Lady, which I'm not totally familiar with. In 1960, she moves to Psycho. And a film called Pepe in 1960, and then to The Manchurian Candidate. Right after The Manchurian Candidate, Janet Leigh made the musical Bye Bye Birdie. I mean, you can't, she's all over the place and doing it great.
And could you imagine her? I believe in that film, in Bye Bye Birdie, she's married to Paul Lynde. Yeah. Can you imagine Paul Lynde and Janet Leigh, and they pollinate and they have Anne Margaret? I mean, talk about it. Stretching the. That's why I love movies. It's just so outlandish. It's gotta be good.
Yeah, boy. Well, it was barely a year after the clip that we just heard, the light comedy The Perfect Furlough, that the film that apparently everyone can agree that is the quintessential Janet Leigh film, and it's Alfred Hitchcock's low-budget 1960 film Psycho.
And what's fascinating about this, Jim, amongst so many things, I mean, one, this film is a phenomenon that still to this day is talked about and dissected. She's only in half the movie.
Less than half, I believe.
Less than half, yeah.
And she was nominated for an Academy Award. She won a Golden Globe Award for Psycho, not an Oscar, but she was nominated. And as you mentioned, she's not in the whole film. She's not in 50% of the film.
I know, and it's a testament to her. I guess the shower scene, one of the greatest scenes in cinema history.
And again, as we were talking about Touch of Evil, pushing the envelope. The first scene that we see with Janet Leigh, you're going in through this window and she's having a little tryst with one of the characters. The first time you see Janet Leigh in Psycho, she's in her bra and underwear, let's just call it. And it's for 1960, other than the shocking elements inherent in Psycho, there were other things that were being pushed in this film.
Absolutely.
It was Alfred Hitchcock, going out on a limb at that time.
I think films such as Touch of Evil, Psycho, Manchurian Candidate were kind of setting the table for what was to come in a few years later in the late 60s, which was the opening of American cinema. At the time these were made, these were pushing the mores of the time as hard as they could, and it was inevitable that films were about to change. And these three classic films that she was in, Touch of Evil, Psycho, and Manchurian Candidate, definitely were instrumental in changing American cinema.
Also reading about Janet Leigh's accepting the role in Psycho, she was willing to go with this lower budget, and she went with a much lower salary. And according to our notes here, the salary that Janet Leigh got for Psycho, $25,000.
Wow.
I hope that's not a misprint, but that's what it says right here. $25,000 to star in Psycho.
Wow, and as a star at that time of the first magnitude, she could have commanded so much more.
Yes. Well, here is a classic scene from Psycho. This is after, the character that Janet Leigh plays in Psycho 2. I mean, she's on the lam. She's stealing a bunch of money. I mean, what's really interesting about her is she's sultry and sexy, as she always is, but she's also a thief in this film.
And you know what's fascinating, Jim? She's sultry, she's sexy, and she lands in the one place where that's not going to save her, that's going to get her killed.
Good point.
I just thought about that now. It's like her beauty and her sexuality is about to work where it's always seemed to work for her. It's about to work very badly against her.
Here's a scene from Psycho.
You eat like a bird.
You'd know, of course.
No, not really. Anyway, I hear the expression eats like a bird. It's really a falsity. Because birds really eat a tremendous lot. But I don't really know anything about birds. My hobby is stuffing things. You know, taxidermy. And I guess I'd just rather stuff birds because I hate the look of beasts when they're stuffed. You know, foxes and chimps. Some people even stuff dogs and cats, but I can't do that. I think only birds look well stuffed because they're kind of passive to begin with.
It's a strange hobby. Curious.
Uncommon, too.
Oh, I imagine so.
And it's not as expensive as you'd think. It's cheap, really. You know, needles, thread, sawdust. The chemicals are the only thing that cost anything.
A man should have a hobby.
Well, it's more than a hobby. A hobby's supposed to pass the time, not fill it.
Is your time so empty?
No. Well, I run the office and tend the cabins and grounds and do little errands for my mother. The one she allows I might be capable of doing.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Well, run for the hills.
And in addition to what you said, Bob, about her charisma working in other films, it works against her in Psycho. There she is at the Bates Hotel, and you'd think, she's strong, she's kind of gutsy because she is on the lam, and this is something that she would be able to survive. But of course, in this situation, as you said, it's the one situation where her gutsiness, her strength, and her charisma didn't work.
Absolutely, with tragic results. And who could forget the infamous shower scene in this movie? I mean, it definitely traumatized a generation of film goers. And, apparently it's in the new remastered versions, there's actually a little more of Janet Leigh in that shower scene than we had seen before.
Oh, maybe the Hitchcock cut itself. Ooh, wow.
Literally.
Wow.
And that's kind of interesting, too. That's showing a lot of skin for a movie at that time. And, again, pushing the envelope.
Well, folks, thanks so much for listening. We thank Hank for being the incredible projectionist, and we hope you enjoyed our tribute to the late, great Janet Leigh, born July 6, 1927, died October 3rd, 2004, but she will live on in the great films that she made. Bob, great talking about Janet Leigh with you.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. I kind of wish we had more time to talk about her because there's so much more we could hit upon. But we'll be back again next week here on Take Two to talk about even more movie greats.
See you then. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.